The morning sun cast long shadows across the palace grounds as Kate stood by the window of her private study. Her hands trembled slightly as she held the letter that had arrived just hours before. The royal seal felt heavier than usual, and the words inside seemed to blur together through her tears. William found her there, still in her morning robe, staring out at the gardens where their children had played just yesterday. He noticed the way her shoulders shook, the way she clutched the letter to her chest, as if it might disappear if she let go. "Darling, what's happened?" he asked softly, crossing the room to stand behind her. His reflection appeared in the window beside hers, and for a moment they looked like ghosts of themselves. Kate turned slowly, her eyes red and puffy. Without saying a word, she handed him the letter. William's face changed as he read, his jaw tightening with each line. The official language couldn't hide the devastating news. Queen Elizabeth had made a decision that would change everything for their family. The letter explained that due to recent health concerns and the changing nature of the monarchy, certain royal duties would need to be redistributed. What it meant for Kate and William was unthinkable. They would need to step back from many of their beloved charitable works and public engagements that had defined their lives for over a decade. "She's trying to protect us," Kate whispered, her voice barely audible. "But this feels like losing a part of ourselves." William set the letter down on the small table beside them and pulled Kate into his arms. They stood there in silence, holding each other as the weight of duty and family tradition pressed down on them. Outside, the world continued as normal, unaware that inside the palace walls, two hearts were breaking. The decision meant they would have to say goodbye to the charities they had nurtured, the communities they had served, and the people who had become like family to them. Kate thought about the children's hospital where she read stories every month, and William remembered the Veterans Center where he had spent countless hours listening to war stories and offering support. "How do we tell the children?" Kate asked, pulling back to look into William's eyes. "George has been so excited about the upcoming foundation gala. Charlotte has been practicing her speech for the youth center opening." William's throat tightened. Their children had grown up understanding the importance of service, of using their positions to help others. Now they would have to explain why Mommy and Daddy couldn't continue some of the work that meant so much to them all. As the morning wore on, Kate and William sat together in their study, reading through years of thank you letters from the organizations they supported. Each letter was a reminder of lives touched, communities strengthened, and hope restored. The pile seemed endless, a testament to the impact they had made together. Kate picked up a drawing from a little girl at the children's hospital, a crayon sketch of Kate reading a story, with hearts floating around them both. "Remember this day?" she asked William, showing him the picture. Emma had just finished her third round of treatment, and she was so proud that she could sit up long enough to listen to the whole story. William nodded, his own eyes filling with tears. "She gave this to you and said you were her real-life princess because you made her feel brave." They spent hours that morning remembering the laughter at youth centers, the quiet moments with grieving families, the joy of seeing projects come to life that would help people for generations. Each memory felt precious now, knowing that this chapter of their lives was coming to an end. The palace staff moved quietly around them, sensing the gravity of the moment. Even the usual bustle of daily royal life seemed muted, as if the very walls understood that something significant was changing. By afternoon, Kate and William knew they would need to start making the difficult phone calls to explain their situation to the charity leaders who had become their friends. But for now, they simply held each other and grieved for the work they would have to leave behind, knowing that sometimes the most painful goodbyes come not from losing people, but from losing the ability to serve them. The first phone call was the hardest. Kate dialed the number for Sarah Mitchell, the director of the children's mental health charity they had supported for 8 years. Her fingers shook as she pressed each digit, knowing that this conversation would be repeated dozens of times over the coming days. "Your Royal Highness, what a lovely surprise." Sarah's warm voice came through the phone, filled with the genuine affection that had developed over years of working together. I was just thinking about you yesterday when little Marcus asked if you were coming to read to the children again this month. Kate's heart shattered a little more. Marcus was a 7-year-old boy who struggled with severe anxiety, but who always seemed calmer when Kate visited. She had watched him slowly gain confidence over the past 2 years, and the thought of not being there for his continued progress felt unbearable. "Sarah, I have some difficult news to share," Kate began, her voice wavering despite her efforts to stay strong. She explained the situation as gently as possible. Watching through her study window as gardeners tended to the rose bush she had planted in honor of the charity's 10th anniversary, the silence on the other end of the line stretched painfully long. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "We understand, of course. The crown must come first. But Kate, the children, they're going to be heartbroken. You've been such a constant in their lives." After ending the call, Kate sat staring at her phone for several minutes before William found her. He carried 2 cups of tea and wore the same haunted expression she felt inside. "The Veterans Center?" she asked softly. William nodded, settling into the chair beside her desk. "Commander Davies couldn't speak for a full minute after I told him. These men and women have served their country, and now they feel like we're abandoning them too." They spent the rest of the afternoon making calls, each conversation more painful than the last. The youth center in Manchester, where they had helped fund a new computer lab. The homeless shelter in Birmingham, where they had served Christmas dinner for 5 consecutive years. The environmental foundation that was halfway through a project to clean up polluted waterways. With each call, Kate and William learned just how deeply their involvement had meant to these organizations. It wasn't just about the royal endorsement or the funding they helped secure. It was about the personal relationships they had built, the hope they had brought to communities that often felt forgotten. "Your Highness," said Mrs. Chun from the Elderly Care Foundation, "when you visited my mother last year during her final days, you held her hand and listened to her stories about growing up during the war. She talked about that visit until the day she passed. That wasn't duty, that was love." By evening, both Kate and William were emotionally drained. They found themselves in the children's playroom, surrounded by artwork and school projects that reflected their family's commitment to service. George had made a poster about ocean conservation for a school project, inspired by their work with marine charities. Charlotte had written a story about helping homeless puppies after visiting an animal rescue with her parents. "How do we explain this to them without making them lose faith in service?" William asked, picking up one of Charlotte's drawings that showed their family helping plant trees. Kate knelt beside a bookshelf filled with photo albums from their charitable work. She pulled out one album and opened it to a picture of their family at a food bank, all of them wearing aprons and serving meals with huge smiles on their faces. Even little Louis, barely walking at the time, was trying to help by carrying paper napkins to tables. "Maybe we focus on what we can still do," Kate said thoughtfully. "Different doesn't have to mean less meaningful." That evening they received an unexpected visitor. Queen Elizabeth herself arrived at their private quarters, something she rarely did. She found them in their sitting room, still going through boxes of letters and mementos from their charitable work. "I know this is difficult," the Queen said, her voice gentler than usual. "But you must understand that this decision comes from love, not judgment." Kate looked up from a thank you card covered in children's handprints. "Your Majesty, these people depend on us. They trust us to be there for them." The Queen sat down, her formal demeanor softening. "My dear Kate, in my 70 years of service, I've learned that sometimes protecting those we love means making choices that break our hearts. The monarchy is changing, and if we don't adapt, we risk losing everything we've built." William stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back. "Grandmother, these charities aren't just work to us. They're family." "I know," the Queen replied quietly. "And that's precisely why this decision was necessary. Your hearts are so fully invested that you've forgotten to protect them. The crown requires us to love broadly but carefully, William. What you've built is beautiful, but it's also dangerous to your well-being, to your marriage, to your children. As the Queen left that night, Kate and William were left to contemplate her words. Outside their window, London sparkled with lights from millions of lives they had tried to touch through their work. Tomorrow would bring the formal announcements and the public's reaction, but tonight was their last quiet evening before everything changed forever. The morning of the announcement arrived gray and drizzling, as if the weather itself understood the somber nature of the day. Kate stood in front of her bedroom mirror, adjusting the same navy dress she had worn to launch her first major charity initiative 9 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on her. Wearing the same outfit to mark both a beginning and an ending, William appeared behind her in the mirror, straightening his tie with hands that weren't quite steady. "Ready?" he asked. Though they both knew nobody could be ready for what lay ahead, the press conference was scheduled for 11 o'clock, giving them just enough time to drive to their final official visits. They had decided to visit 3 locations that morning, a small gesture, but one that felt important to them both. Their first stop was the Children's Hospital, where Kate had spent countless hours reading stories and simply being present for families during their darkest moments. As their car pulled up to the familiar building, Kate saw faces pressed against windows on multiple floors. Word had somehow gotten out, and the children were waiting to see her one last time. Dr. Sarah Hassan, the head pediatrician, met them at the entrance with tears already streaming down her face. "They've been asking all morning if the rumors were true," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't know what to tell them." Walking through the halls felt surreal. Every room held a memory: the corner where she had comforted the parents of a child who didn't survive surgery, the playroom where she had celebrated recovery milestones, the quiet spaces where she had simply sat with children who were afraid. In the cancer ward, 8-year-old Emma was waiting with the same crayon drawing she had given Kate months earlier. "I made you another one," she said shyly, holding up a new picture. This one showed Kate and Emma holding hands under a rainbow, with the words, "Thank you for making me brave," written in purple crayon. Kate knelt down to Emma's level, taking the drawing with hands that trembled slightly. "Emma, you don't need me to be brave. The bravery was inside you all along. I just gotta see it." Emma's small arms wrapped around Kate's neck in a fierce hug. "Will you remember me?" "Always," Kate whispered, her composure finally cracking as tears flowed freely down her cheeks. The scene was repeated room after room, child after child. Some were too young to understand fully, but they sensed the sadness in the adults around them. Others, like 12-year-old James, who had been battling leukemia for 3 years, understood exactly what was happening. "Your Highness," James said with a maturity that broke Kate's heart, "thank you for teaching us that being royal isn't about crowns and castles. It's about caring for people." Meanwhile, William was saying his own difficult goodbyes at the Veterans Center across town. Commander Davies had assembled a small group of the men and women William had worked with most closely over the years. These were soldiers who had lost limbs, suffered PTSD, and struggled to find their place in civilian life. William had been more than a royal patron to them. He had been a brother. "Sir," said Tommy Morrison, a veteran who had lost both legs in Afghanistan, "you gave us hope when the world had forgotten about us. That doesn't end just because you can't visit anymore." William struggled to find words. These men and women had served their country with honor, and he felt like he was abandoning them when they needed support most. "You taught me what real service looks like," he finally managed. "Everything I learned about duty and sacrifice I learned from you." The group stood in formation one last time, saluting their prince who had become their friend. William returned the salute, but his military bearing couldn't hide the emotion etched on his face. By 10:30, both Kate and William were back at the palace, preparing for the press conference that would officially announce their scaled-back royal duties. They had 15 minutes to collect themselves before facing the media and the world. In the private bathroom adjacent to the press room, Kate touched up her makeup while William splashed cold water on his face. Neither spoke. There wasn't much left to say that hadn't already been said through tears and embraces over the past few days. "Your Royal Highnesses," came a gentle knock from their private secretary. It's time. Walking into that press room felt like walking to their own funeral. The assembled reporters were respectfully quiet, sensing that this wasn't a typical royal announcement. Camera flashes illuminated their faces as they took their seats at the podium, and Kate was grateful for the bright lights that would hopefully hide any remaining traces of tears. William spoke first, his voice steady but lacking its usual warmth. He explained the Queen's decision to streamline royal duties, the need to focus on core constitutional responsibilities, and the importance of supporting the monarchy's future. Stability. Kate followed with her own statement about gratitude for the years of service they had been privileged to provide and their commitment to supporting their chosen charities in whatever ways they could going forward. The questions from reporters were gentle but probing. How did it feel to step back from work they clearly loved? What would happen to the projects they had championed? How would they maintain connections with the communities they had served? Each answer felt inadequate, like trying to explain the color blue to someone who had never seen the sky. How could they convey the depth of relationships they were losing, the sense of purpose that was being stripped away, the feeling that they were disappointing thousands of people who had trusted them to be there? As the press conference ended and they walked away from the podium together, Kate and William knew that their old life was officially over. The future stretched ahead, uncertain and full of different kinds of responsibilities, but forever marked by the silence where the voices of those they could no longer serve used to be. The days following the press conference felt like living in a strange, muted version of their former life. Kate found herself waking up at the usual time, instinctively reaching for her phone to check the schedule that no longer existed. William would catch himself planning visits to projects that were no longer theirs to oversee. The palace corridors seemed quieter, with fewer staff members rushing around to coordinate charitable events and community visits. Even their children noticed the change. George kept asking when they were going to visit the environmental center to see how the tree planting project was growing. Charlotte wondered aloud why Mommy seemed so sad all the time. On the fourth day after the announcement, something unexpected happened. A small package arrived addressed simply to Kate and William with no return address. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a hand-knitted scarf in royal blue wool. A note written in shaky handwriting read, "From Mrs. Patterson, age 87. You visited me in the care home 2 years ago when I had no family. You sat with me for an hour and listened to my stories. This is my way of wrapping you both in love." Kate held the scarf against her chest, remembering Mrs. Patterson perfectly. She had been alone in the world, her children having moved abroad and her husband having passed years earlier. Kate had found her sitting by herself during a group activity, and something about the elderly woman's dignity and solitude had drawn her over. "She taught me how to knit this pattern," Kate whispered to William, running her fingers over the intricate stitches. Her mother taught it to her during the war when they had to make do with whatever yarn they could find. That afternoon, more packages began arriving. A jar of homemade jam from the community garden they had helped establish in East London. A photo album filled with pictures from the youth center, showing teenagers they had mentored over the years, many now in university or starting careers. A wooden bird carving made by residents of the homeless shelter, each person having worked on a different detail. By the end of the week, their private sitting room looked like a shrine of gratitude. Letters poured in by the hundreds, each one a reminder of a moment, a conversation, a life that had been touched. Kate and William read them together each evening, often through tears. One letter particularly moved them both. It came from David, a young man who had struggled with severe depression and had been on the verge of taking his own life when he encountered William at a mental health awareness event 3 years earlier. "Your Royal Highness," the letter read, "you probably don't remember me, but you talked to me for 20 minutes about feeling lost after leaving the military. You told me that seeking help was the bravest thing a soldier could do. I'm writing to tell you that I'm now training to become a counselor myself, helping other veterans who feel like I did. You planted a seed that day that grew into my whole new life. That doesn't change just because your duties have changed. William had to step outside onto the balcony after reading that letter. The weight of realizing how many Davids there might be, people whose lives had been quietly transformed by a moment of genuine connection, felt almost unbearable. Kate found him there an hour later, staring out at the London skyline. "Do you remember what David looked like?" she asked softly. William nodded. Tall, thin, had a scar on his left hand from an IED explosion in Iraq. He kept checking his phone during our conversation, nervous about being there. He told me he almost didn't come to the event. "That's what I don't understand about the Queen's decision," Kate said, joining him at the balcony railing. "How do we measure the value of those 20 minutes you spent with David? How do we weigh that against constitutional duties?" The question hung in the air between them, unanswered because it might be unanswerable. That evening, their children joined them for dinner, as they always did when they were home. George, now old enough to understand more about their situation, asked the question that had been troubling him all week. "Papa, Mama, are you sad because you can't help people anymore?" William and Kate exchanged glances across the dining table. How do you explain to a child that helping people isn't just what you do, but who you are? How do you tell them that feeling useful, needed, and connected to something bigger than yourself isn't just nice to have, but essential to feeling alive? "We're sad because we'll miss spending time with the people we've come to love," Kate answered carefully. "But we can still help people, just in different ways." Charlotte, with the directness that only a young child possesses, cut straight to the heart of it. "But you're crying every night. I can hear you from my room." The honesty of their daughter's observation left both parents speechless for a moment. They had tried so hard to protect their children from the depth of their grief, but children notice everything. "Sometimes grown-ups need to cry when something important changes," William said gently. "It doesn't mean we're broken. It means we cared very much about what we were doing." That night, after tucking their children into bed, Kate and William made a decision. They couldn't continue drowning in grief for what they had lost. They needed to find a way to honor the connections they had made while building something new from the pieces of their changed life. They spent hours that evening going through the letters and gifts they had received, but this time, instead of crying, they began making lists. Names of people who had become important to them. Issues that still needed champions. Ways they might stay connected even if they couldn't maintain their official roles. "Maybe," Kate said as midnight approached, "this isn't just an ending. Maybe it's also a beginning we just can't see yet." William looked at his wife, seeing strength emerging from the sorrow in her eyes. "Mrs. Patterson didn't send us that scarf because she wanted us to stay sad," he realized. "She sent it because she wanted us to stay warm." Outside their window, London slept peacefully, unaware that inside the palace, two people who had learned to love through service were beginning to understand that love itself might be stronger than any official role could ever be. 3 weeks after the announcement, Kate woke up with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since everything changed. She had spent the previous evening writing personal letters, not official royal correspondence, but genuine notes from her heart to people who had mattered to her during her years of service. She started with Emma from the Children's Hospital, carefully crafting words that a young girl could understand but would carry with her as she grew. "Dear brave Emma," she wrote, "I want you to know that every time you face something scary and choose to be strong, you're showing the world what real royalty looks like. Keep being the princess of your own story." William found her at the kitchen table at dawn, surrounded by dozens of handwritten letters. This was unprecedented. Royals didn't typically maintain personal correspondence with people they had met through official duties. But nothing about their situation was typical anymore. "I need to stay connected somehow," Kate explained, not looking up from the letter she was writing to Mrs. Chun's daughter about her mother's final days. "Maybe I can't visit them officially, but I can still let them know they matter." William sat down beside her and picked up a pen. "Where do we start?" Together they spent the morning writing. Some letters were to children who had inspired them with their courage. Others went to elderly people who had shared their stories and wisdom. They wrote to families who had overcome incredible hardships and to organizations that were doing important work in their communities. Each letter was personal, specific, filled with details that proved these weren't form notes, but genuine communications between people who had developed real relationships. Kate remembered favorite colors and pet names. William recalled conversations about family members and personal dreams. By afternoon, they had written 47 letters. Their hands were cramped and their emotions were raw from revisiting so many meaningful encounters, but something had shifted. The grief was still there, but it was mixed with something new, sense that connection didn't require. Official titles. The next day brought an unexpected phone call. Dr. Hassan from the Children's Hospital was calling with news. That would change everything. Kate thought she knew about her impact. Your Royal Highness, Dr. Hassan said, her voice filled with excitement. I have something extraordinary to tell you. Emma's latest scans show that her cancer is in complete remission. But that's not why I'm calling. Kate felt her heart stop for a moment, then restart with relief at Emma's good news. Emma asked me to call you specifically, Dr. Hassan continued. She wanted you to know that when she was most scared during her treatment, she would think about the brave princes who came to read stories. She said you taught her that being scared and being brave can happen at the same time. Her doctors believe that mental state played a significant role in her recovery. After ending the call, Kate sat in stunned silence. The idea that her presence, her simple act of showing up and caring, had contributed to a child's healing was overwhelming. She called William immediately, barely able to get the words out through her tears. Don't you see? William said when she finished telling him about Emma. This is why the work mattered so much. It was never really about the official visits or the photo opportunities. It was about showing up as yourself, caring about people as individuals. That afternoon, they received another call that would further reshape their understanding of their situation. It was from Sarah Mitchell at the Children's Mental Health Charity, but she wasn't calling to say goodbye. Kate, Sarah said, using the informal name she had earned the right to use over years of friendship. I've been thinking about everything that's happened, and I have a proposal. What if we found ways for you to stay involved that didn't conflict with your new royal duties? The conversation that followed opened up possibilities neither Kate nor William had considered. Sarah explained that many of their most meaningful interactions had happened away from cameras and official engagements. The private conversations with struggling families, the handwritten notes of encouragement, the quiet moments of just being present with people in pain. Could you imagine writing a monthly letter that we could share with families? Sarah asked. Not as the Duchess of Cambridge making an official statement, but as Kate, a mother who cares about other children. Could you picture recording brief video messages for children who are having particularly difficult days? As Sarah outlined various possibilities, Kate realized that stepping back from official duties might actually create space for more authentic forms of service. Without the constraints of royal protocol and media attention, she might be able to connect with people in ways that had been impossible before. That evening, William had a similar conversation with Commander Davies from the Veterans Center. The commander had been thinking about the unique perspective William brought to his work with veterans, not just as a prince who understood military protocol, but as someone who had served and understood the brotherhood of soldiers. Sir, the commander said, what if you could write a book about what you've learned from our veterans? What if you could help train other people who want to support military families? Your official duties may have changed, but your heart for service and your understanding of sacrifice, those don't change. As Kate and William talked through these conversations that night, they began to see their situation differently. Instead of losing their ability to serve, they were being forced to discover new forms of service that might ultimately be more meaningful than anything they had done before. Maybe, Kate said thoughtfully, we needed to lose the official framework to find the authentic connection that was always at the heart of what we were doing. William nodded, remembering something his grandmother had said during their difficult conversation weeks earlier. She told us that loving broadly but carefully was the key to royal service. Maybe we were loving so broadly that we lost the careful part. Maybe this is our chance to love more carefully. That night, for the first time since receiving the life-changing letter, both Kate and William fell asleep without crying. They were still grieving what they had lost, but they were also beginning to hope for what they might discover in the space that loss had created outside their window. London sparkled with the same lights as always, but inside the palace, two people were learning that sometimes the most profound service comes not from the roles we're given, but from the love we choose to share when no one is watching and no protocol requires it. 6 months later, Kate sat in the same study where she had first read the letter that changed everything. But this time, she wasn't holding official correspondence. Instead, she was reading emails on her personal laptop, messages from people whose lives had been touched by the quiet revolution she and William had started in the aftermath of their public goodbye. The first email was from Emma, now cancer-free and learning to write properly. The spelling was imperfect, but the message was clear. Dear Kate, not your Royal Highness, because you told me I could call you Kate. I got your letter, and I read it every morning before school. My teacher says I'm the bravest student in my class. Thank you for teaching me that brave is something you choose to be every day. The second email included a photograph that made Kate's breath catch. It showed David, the veteran William had spoken with at the mental health event, standing with 5 other young men in front of a small community center. The message explained that David had opened a peer support group for veterans transitioning to civilian life, using techniques he had learned from his own therapy. Prince William may not be able to visit us officially anymore. The message read, but his influence is multiplied through every person we help. Kate scrolled through dozens of similar messages. The homeless shelter had started a letter-writing program where residents wrote to isolated elderly people, inspired by the personal notes Kate had sent them. The youth center had created a mentorship network where older teens who had overcome challenges supported younger ones facing similar struggles. William appeared in the doorway. Holding his own laptop and wearing an expression of wonder Kate had learned to recognize over the past months. The Veterans Organization wants to nominate me for an award, he said, sitting down across from her. Not for my royal service, but for the training manual I wrote about supporting military families. Apparently, it's being used by community organizations across the country. They had discovered something remarkable in their forced step back from public service. Without the pressure of official engagements and media coverage, they had been able to focus on what had always mattered most, the individual. Relationships and the ripple effects of genuine care. Kate's monthly letters to families dealing with childhood illness had been shared so widely that a publisher had approached her about turning them into a book. The book would be written not by the Duchess of Cambridge, but by Kate Middleton, a mother who had learned about resilience from the children she had met. William's informal conversations with veterans had evolved into a comprehensive support program that was being studied by mental health professionals. His insights about the military brotherhood and the challenges of civilian transition were helping shape policy in ways his official royal duties never could have. Their children had noticed the change in their parents too. George had started writing his own letters to children in hospitals, having learned from watching his mother that caring about others was something you could do anywhere, anytime. Charlotte had begun collecting toys to donate to shelters, understanding that helping people didn't require a royal title. Mama, Charlotte had said just the week before, I think you're happier now than when you were doing Prince's work all the time. The observation had stopped Kate in her tracks because it was true. The grief for their former life had gradually transformed into gratitude for their current one. The connections they were making now felt deeper, more sustainable, more authentically themselves. That afternoon, Kate and William took a walk through Hyde Park, something they had rarely had time for during their hectic schedules of official engagements. As they walked, they talked about the unexpected gifts their forced transition had brought. Remember how overwhelmed we felt trying to serve dozens of organizations effectively? William asked, watching their children play on the swings ahead of them. I was spread so thin that I sometimes felt like I wasn't truly present for anyone. Kate nodded, thinking about the packed schedules that had left little time for meaningful conversation or follow-up with the people they met. Now, when I write to someone, I can take the time to really think about what they need to hear. When we visit someone informally, we can stay as long as they need us too. As the sun began to set over London, they found themselves on a bench facing the palace. The building that had been both their privilege and their burden looked different from this distance. It was still imposing, still beautiful, still their home, but it no longer felt like a cage. "Do you miss it?" Kate asked, meaning all of it, the official duties, the public recognition, the sense of importance that came with their former roles. William considered the question seriously. "I miss some of it. I miss the resources we had to help organizations quickly. I miss the platform we had to raise awareness about important issues. But I don't miss feeling like we never had enough time to truly connect with people." Kate's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Mrs. Patterson's niece, sharing that her aunt had passed away peacefully in her sleep the night before. The message included a photo of Mrs. Patterson's bedside table, where Kate's most recent letter sat next to a picture of her late husband. "She said your letters made her feel like she had family again," the niece wrote as Kate shared the message with William. Both of them felt the familiar mixture of sadness and gratitude that had become the defining emotion of their new life. Sadness for the loss of someone who had touched their hearts, gratitude for having been able to provide comfort in small but meaningful ways. "The Queen was right," Kate said quietly, surprising herself with the admission. "We were loving so broadly that we couldn't love carefully. We were trying to help everyone and ending up helping no one as deeply as they deserved." William took her hand as they watched the lights begin to twinkle in palace windows where staff were preparing for another day of official royal business that would continue without them in those particular roles. "I think," William said slowly, "that the silent farewell we thought we were making 6 months ago was actually the beginning of a different kind of hello." As they walked home together, Kate and William knew that their story was far from over. They were still royal, still committed to service, still deeply invested in making the world better. But they were doing it now as themselves. Without the weight of official expectations or the pressure of public schedules, the silent farewell had taught them that the most profound goodbyes sometimes lead to the most meaningful beginnings, and that losing what you thought defined you might be the only way to discover who you really are. Behind them, the palace stood as magnificent as ever, but ahead of them, a different kind of future stretched out like an open letter waiting to be written by hand, with care, one person at a time.